So let's try out these problems. The third root of 8, or the cubed root of 8. What times what times what would be 8? Here we've got the cubed root of 64 and the cubed root of negative 27, which at first glance might be like, what's going on there? But we'll talk about that. So think about this and see if you can complete these first. Take a moment, maybe pause the video. All right, so hopefully you figured out that for 8, it's 2 times 2 times 2, so the cubed root of 8 is 2. Now, just like with square roots, since there's no negative sign or positive and negative, they only want the positive cubed root, so we're just going to put 2. On this next one, we actually had this in the last example, it was 4. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4 is 64. Now, here, you might be thinking, well, didn't we just learn in the last unit that you cannot square root negatives? But here, we've got the cube root of a negative. Now, at first glance, we might think, well, if it doesn't work for square roots, it shouldn't work for cube roots. But actually, it does. We do have an answer here of negative 3. And the reason why we can cube root negatives, but we can't square root them, is because think about the nature of multiplication in negatives. The way we got negative 27 was to do negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. And so what happens here is negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9, but then 9 positive times another negative 3 changes it back to a negative. Oops, that's an ugly 7. So in fact, it is possible to cube root negatives, although we can't square root negatives. All right, one last thing to discuss. What about large numbers? Well, the only thing I'm going to say here is go back to our two strategies. One strategy is to prime factorize. I can take 216, I can start breaking it down to its prime factors. In this case, 2 times 108, 2 times 54. Let's see, that's going to be 2 times 27. 27 is 3 times 9. And 9 is 3 times 3. Okay, but in this case, we are taking the cube root, not the square root. So the only thing that changes in our strategy here is to take the numbers. In this case, 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times 3. And then, instead of putting them into two different groups, because we're taking the cube root, we're going to reorganize these into three groups. Basically 2 times 3 times 2 times 3 times 2 times 3. Oops, went a little too far. Which really equates to, if I put parentheses, 6 times 6 times 6. So the cubed root of 216 is 6. Okay, now let's say you don't want to go through all this. Once again, our other strategy from square roots is to just use some educated guessing, some targeted estimation. So basically what I like to do is I like to try out some numbers that are fairly easy to work with. So what I'll do is I'll take maybe 5 cubed. And let's assume I didn't know what the answer was already. 5 times 5 is 25. 25 times 5 is 125. A little bit too small. So maybe I move my targeted guess up a little bit higher. Maybe 7. So it turns out 7 times 7 is 49. And 49 times 7 turns out to be 343. And little by little, I just use some targeted guessing and then narrow my answers down. And we find out eventually it's right in between. 6 to the third. 6 times 6 is 36, and 36 times 6 is 216. So don't forget about these two strategies from square roots because they're going to help us out with cube roots. Okay, so take this information and use it to complete your classwork, and good luck.